to the Maine Planning Basics webinar series. My name is Tom Mariola. I'm a senior planner with the Municipal Planning Assistance Program at DACF. These monthly webinars are intended for those that are new to the planning profession. Reminder that these sessions are recorded and posted to our website. I'll post a link to that website with the future dates, though they'll be updated after this meeting, and the past recordings there. This recording should be up hopefully by the end of the day or first thing Monday. Our next session will be Friday, September 5th. We do not have a topic for September yet, so please send along your ideas. Following that, on Friday, October 3rd, you can join us for a talk about the new Maine Office of Community Affairs. This is the new department that's been formed, and we'll be moving over there in September. So by October, we should know a little more about it. Commissioner Samantha Horn will talk about the service improvements due to the enhanced cooperation, and you can obviously ask any questions you have of her. For folks, just so folks know, MOCA, Maine Office of Community Affairs, primarily is going to be the Maine Coastal Program, Maine Floodplain Management, our program, the Municipal Planning Assistance Program, the Housing Opportunities Program, Code Enforcement, and Volunteer Maine. Today, we are welcomed by Colin Clark, Shoreland Zoning Coordinator for the Bureau of Resources of the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. The Shoreland Zoning Program is split into 4 geographic areas, and I always have to look at a map to get to know what they are. The Southern, Central, Eastern, and Northern. Colin supervises all 4 regions, but is also the contact for the Central region. Colin's pleasure to have you, and you can begin whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, like Tom mentioned, Colin Clark, I'm the State Shoreline Zoning Coordinator. We are split up into 4 distinct districts across the state. So there's 4 of us dealing with 465, 66 organized towns, which is a little bit of an uphill battle with 4 people, but we do the best we can with what we got. A little bit about me. I've been with the department here for nearly 25 years now. I have been Shoreline Zoning Coordinator since 2013, I guess. Seems like it was shorter than that ago, but you blink and time goes by is what I'm realizing as both of my kids are, entering final years of things. So I have this canned up presentation that I've given a few times. I have switched stuff around a little bit for this group. I'm just going to blaze through it fairly fast and leave some time for questions and that kind of stuff at the end. But we will get things started here, and let's hope technology is my friend today and things work as they should. If not, I will mute myself while I get upset with my computer. So back in 2015, the guidelines were updated based on changes that were made in statute in 2013. We have had a fairly good amount of towns update their ordinances, but there's still quite a few that have not updated and are not fully consistent with the guidelines. And the Act requires that ordinances be consistent. And we do what we can to help municipalities with this process. I'm sure a lot of you already know how this goes, but how the roles are here. The municipality adopts and amends their ordinance. They administer and enforce it. They deal with the administrative appeals and make those decisions. The DEP, we provide guidance on ordinance amendment updates. We actually have a bunch of what I call glorified Mad Libs at this point, where towns can literally write their name, put a couple of dates in there, and away they go. They've got a canned up, pre-written ordinance for them that is based solely on the minimum guidelines. After they do their local approval, they send those into the department. We approve those amendments. We can provide advisory opinions. We provide enforcement assistance. The department cannot do the enforcement for towns. which I know there's a lot of communities out there would love to have us just do that, but that isn't our role. They're charged with that. And then we provide comments on variance requests. One of the big things that we were dealing with trying to get towns updated is the timber harvesting choices. And basically they had three choices. Option one is they completely defer to the Maine Forest Service and let them handle it. This is what we're recommending. The Forest Service folks, they deal with this stuff every single day, and they can walk onto a site and usually tell if something's in violation very, very quickly. Versus if I get out there with a local CEO and it takes us 3 hours to walk a 40-acre plot and to look at the harvest, it's not as efficient, we'll say. Option two would be adopt the statewide standards, and it's kind of a joint effort between the municipality and the Forest Service, which is a good option as well. And option three is go it alone. Basically, you get the standards from your ordinance, and the Maine Forest Service is not going to assist the town in dealing with that. That's pretty much worst case scenario in my opinion. I did have a conversation with a town and their CEO a few years back, and the CEO was very, very upset with me for even implying that they should defer timber harvesting to the Maine Forest Service. Because he was a legitimate forester and knew the regulations very, very well, and he didn't want to defer anything back to the state, which I get, but most CEOs are not retired foresters and they don't have that expertise. And from my opinion, even if you do have that expertise, there's some legal liabilities and some strain on a local budget to prosecute and take enforcement cases against timber harvesting violations, which they wouldn't need to bear if it was done through the Forest Service. But pluses and minuses, but they're able to make that choice. Some timber harvesting updates that happened. We basically just lined everything up with the Natural Resources Protection Act in dealing with bridge and culvert sizing, changed a couple of definitions, but nothing major, just kind of getting stuff consistent between the two laws. Timber harvesting, it's defined as the cutting and removal of timber for the primary purpose of selling or processing forest products. Does not include removal in the shoreland zone associated with a land use activity, unless they are actually doing a timber harvest and there's 2 acres of land within the shoreland zone that's being harvested. This one comes up a lot. People will hang the banner of a forestry notification and then get down in there and rip and tear and open up $1 million view under the guise of forestry, and then they realize, oh, you don't even own 2 acres, so that's definitely not timber harvesting, that's just clearing of vegetation. And then they end up having to do a lot of replanting and explaining and everything like that. So the key on the timber harvesting thing in the shoreland zone is it's got to be 2 acres in size to actually be a legitimate timber harvest. Another big change in the 2015 version was the language associated with individual private campsites. And that came on the back of whether people had a principal use or a dwelling or something going on the property already. And so, a requirement was set forth to actually establish some dimensional requirements for those individual private campsites. You can have 1 campsite per lot or 30,000 square feet. So if you've got like a big lot, maybe you could have a couple of them. But even if you have a lot that's under 30,000 square feet, you are guaranteed to be able to have an individual private campsite on your lot. It's just if you're going to have more than one, you need to meet that extra dimensional requirement. The other thing that came into play is if you did have an existing camp or dwelling or principal use on the property, then you need to have the dimensional requirements met for that use or dwelling, plus an additional 30,000 square feet for that individual private campsite. So When I'm talking about an individual private campsite, I'm meaning something that, somebody's established for a camping area. There's a gravel pad, a tent platform, something along those lines. When I'm talking about this, I get into this with CEOs quite regularly, talking about, oh, well, Buddy Joe is having a family reunion, and they're having a couple campers in their driveway, and the kids are shacked up in a big tent. Um, what do you do with that? And I advise CEOs to be consistent with their application of the law, clearly, but to also have a little bit of common sense approach to it. I wouldn't look at that event as an individual private campsite event. That's a family gathering that's going to happen over a couple of days. It's not sitting there being used like that over and over again repeatedly. If that was the case, then obviously they need to meet those dimensional requirements. But it is the town's job to administer and enforce the law. And if they want to be more restrictive in that regard and require that for those kids' tents or brother-in-law RVs or whatever, then they absolutely are within their rights to do it, as long as they consistently apply that standard to everybody. That's the one thing with shoreland zoning, as with a lot of environmental laws, land use laws specifically, having a level playing field where consistent application of the rule is very, very important. It's probably the most important thing for CEOs, planning boards, and select boards and appeals boards, just that consistency. So people know when they come in that they're going to be treated the same. And also it reduces that legal liability for a community if they can demonstrate that, hey, we've consistently done this through the years, and this is how we do our permitting for those type of events. It's kind of the look at a individual private campsite deal. We did make some changes in the definition of a structure to include the underlined words that temporarily or permanently located, built, constructed, or erected. There was a whole reference there of temporary structures not needing to meet the setback, and so we had a lot of those easy up kind of tarp garage things popping up, or those little storage sheds you can buy at Lowe's or Home Depot popping up, and just needed to refine that definition a little bit so people understood that even if it was a temporary thing, then it would need to meet the setback. As you can see on the screen here in the little pictures, we've got a little patio down next to the water, a little camper deck thing, and then the classic gazebo on a deck. All of those meet the definition of a structure. All of them need to meet the setback. So another optional exemption from the definition of structure is fences and poles and equipment for service drops has been in there for a long time. We did have some legislation that went through dealing with wells and geothermal wells, and not having them be considered a structure. The premise on that is you got to have your septic system a certain number of feet away from your well, and everybody would rather have clean well water being the closest thing to the resource rather than a septic system. So if something's going to fail, you'd rather have well water failing and getting out into the resource than a septic right down next to the water. So exempting that was a good deal. It does require potential replanting, as you can see in this picture. The rig goes down there. They put in their well casing and get everything drilled out, and the access way from which the driller accessed the site needed to be replanted. Obviously having good erosion controls up while the process is going on, and then planting some trees on the way out to reestablish that good buffer vegetation is key in that regard. Another option that went in is decks over rivers. So in a downtown revitalization district, you get a lot of communities, they have a lot of old mill buildings and things like that where the mills aren't there. Those are being turned into brew pubs and all kinds of different things all over the state. to make those options a little bit more enticing. In those downtown revitalization districts, they're allowed to have a cantilever deck, basically off the side of the structure, which is a little bit, different. That we're actually allowing something to be out like that. Obviously, people still need to get in, get their NERPA permits and all of that, but they are allowed to put in some decks to allow for seating for restaurants and pubs and things like that, or maybe it's something for meeting areas or other items that would need that kind of seating. In dealing with height, there were some exemptions added. Chimneys and steeples and antennas and all of that stuff had always kind of been in there. Transmission towers, windmills, antennas. The most recent addition is that Widow's Walk or cupola that is kind of an architectural design type of feature. It doesn't have any habitable area. There's no floor space. There's no real way to even do anything up there, maybe other than look through the window. But in all honesty, a lot of these things are just decorative, so the roof line isn't cut open. So I mean, I don't even think you could put your head up in there in most cases. A couple friends of ours had one added to their house, and I went over and checked it out, and I thought for sure, maybe they cut the hole so you could stick your head up there, but no, it was just nothing. You can't see anything, which is different than the historical ones that I've seen and visited that typically do allow you some access up through there to get a better view of the water, get a better view of the community. The one that I think of when I was growing up in Gardner, a neighbor had one, and you could get up in there, and there was no place to really sit, but you could get your head up into the window and you could see over the whole town, and it was a pretty cool feature. So one of the biggest issues that we deal with, and is probably challenging for communities to deal with as well, is the non-vegetated surfaces. A lot of times in municipalities, they'll be talking about impervious surfaces, and that isn't what the rule says at all. It's non-vegetated, so it doesn't need to be impervious to be considered non-vegetated. In the picture here, you can kind of see you get the driveway going down over to the right next to that pallet. That's all just disturbed land, so that's all non-vegetated. Underneath all the structures, all the gravel, all that stuff is non-vegetated. So limiting that amount of non-vegetated really is key to making sure that the buffers are able to handle water runoff during storm events. So 20% in most shoreline zone districts, 70% in coastal wetland and rivers not flowing to great ponds where it's commercial fisheries, maritime, or general development. So those are the areas that are a little bit more heavily developed for fishing practices or an industrial type of an area under general development. Yeah, you got a question?
Yeah, hi, Colin. Just for those that may not know, can you just define CFMA and GD, please?
Yeah, so CFMA is Commercial Fisheries Maritime Activities, and GD is General Development District. So commercial fisheries districts, you're going to see a lot of coastal communities. It's where you're going to see most of the lobster boats going out and those type of businesses happening, whereas general development is more, I typically see more of an inland environment, and those are the areas in, say, like a town like Auburn or Portland, where they have more industrial type activities. It's more intense uses in those areas. So some examples here, kind of what we were just talking about: structures, parking areas, land previously developed, other areas in which veg is removed. One thing that we did add in there is an optional exemption for naturally occurring ledge and rock outcroppings on lots existing back on 3/24/1990. I have no idea why 3/24 was picked. That's I guess above my pay grade. That's kind of out of nowhere. I'm sure that has some legal reference, but I am not sure what that is. It's a very specific date. And And why that kind of went in is we were having folks down in the coastal communities that were actively trying to bring in loom and seed off ledge down next to the ocean. Well, Mother Nature doesn't typically like that, and all that loom and seed and all that stuff was just getting washed away on high tides. And for people being penalized for just having a place that has some occurring ledge, it was a natural exemption to allow for those areas not to count. As many of you may know, that we used to have an exemption for grass pavers. That policy has gone away. They, in all honesty, just did not work. Here's kind of the picture of the naturally occurring ledge situation. Typical coast of Maine that has high surge, especially when you get a lot of exposed bedrock there. So we did amend the definition of functionally water dependent, obviously including fish-related storage, including shoreline structures necessary for erosion control purposes, and the exclusion of recreational boat storage buildings. So, when I was growing up, I spent a lot of time out at Dave's Marina in Belgrade, and I always thought one of the coolest things as a kid was every Friday afternoon they'd do a little boat tour, and all these people would have these wooden Chris-Craft boats, and they'd kind of do a little parade around the pond, and it was really cool. And I thought it was cool that they all kind of like pulled out of garages. They even had garage door openers and all that stuff, and that's something that was all the rage in the past. It's something that you can't do now. I always encourage anybody that has one of those, if I get contacted by the CEO or the property owner, to maintain those things. Get out there, do that good maintenance every year, because once that thing is gone, once it's damaged by more than 50%, you're going to have to go through greatest practical extent review, and that is not going to be a viable boathouse for you anymore. But it's very historical in the state of Maine. I think they're cool as heck. Just like a lot of the old mill buildings that are along some of our resources. I like to see those maintained and kept up good, rather than falling into the water and something less desirable, in my opinion, going in their place. So structures below the shoreline, towns have an option to either regulate these structures or not. Many towns do. One thing that went into that is in the Piers Docks Wharf section, you're only allowed to have one of these structures per frontage. So if you have a double lot and you got double frontage, you could have, a pier and a dock for your jet skis or boats or whatever. But if you just have one frontage, you're only allowed one dock. We ran into a situation where folks were throwing out 3 and 4 docks on 200 feet of frontage and just like porcupine in the shoreline, and it really wasn't working out. And it all came down to basically word choice. That section in Chapter 1000 used to say a dock, but that didn't hold up legally. That singular tense didn't work. So we specifically needed to say one structure per lot in that criteria. A structure on floats is prohibited unless it's designed to function as a watercraft. Many of you may have been paying attention to the float homes bill that just went through the process. The brown cabin here on the right-hand side of the screen is exactly what we were dealing with. They're essentially just camps built on floats. I tend to think that society, especially around here, seems to follow the trends that we see on TV a lot of times. When I first started with the department, that show Swamp Loggers was all the rage on Discovery Channel, and we had tons of people coming in and saying, oh, they're going to start going hauling logs off the bottom of the Kennebec or the Penobscot, and they're going to make $1 million doing it. Well, there's a lot of different rules around here that deal with that, and we simply don't have cypress trees like they do down in the bayous that hold up for a long time underwater. But there was a lot of people coming in like that. More recently, we have that Swamp People show again on Discovery, which is dealing with like alligator hunting and all that other stuff, and it shows all these floating camps all over the bayous in Louisiana, and very cool. But again, that's not what we have for landscape. And the biggest issue down for us here versus down there is in their communities down there, they have, pump off boats that, roll around to these structures and pump off their black and gray water, kind of like, a porta potty company does around here. We don't have those services. And obviously, land rights are a little different as well, but more to come on that. Shoreline stabilization, there's an actual, a whole section dedicated to it now. There's standards for planning board review. Installation of the rock should be done by barge if feasible. Vegetation removal is very limited. If it does exceed the vegetation standards, you got to revegetate. The shoreline zoning staff is actually being brought in on the NERPA permitting side of things. We're getting a look at these permits. These permit applications before they get approved by the department, just to make sure they're meeting shoreline zoning specs, and gives us an opportunity to get with the towns as well so they can provide comments about some of these activities. Here's another one of the float home deals. This one was up on Hattie's Pond in Machiasport, maybe. Clearly not a boat. And that thing actually ended up on that sandy beach in the background, froze in the winter, and then basically destroyed itself from the winter activity. So then there's, all that fill and stuff everywhere in that cove. So, structures like that are very, very difficult to get out of the water. And, beaching them on the shore is clearly not going to work in this case because that thing broke all apart as soon as it froze around it. Some of the other issues that we run into, these are actually fairly close to where I live. Having a couple porta potties on a dock over the water, not a great idea. And the gazebo there, actually, allegedly that thing disconnects from the main dock and it has a little outboard on it, and they cruise it around the pond. I've never actually seen that happen, but I've seen enough of these structures that have a little outboard on them that don't actually move anywhere. It's just for looks, I guess. And those are all items that we're trying to deal with in that floating home bill and the implementation of that. This is one that came in that, when people are like, oh, this is a functionally water dependent structure. It can stay where it is. This gazebo specifically was going to get a tear down rebuild done on it. And they basically stated that they didn't remove more than 50% of the market value on this thing requiring greatest practical extent review. And the town reached out to me and they're like, yeah, what's your opinion on this? And they sent me the valuation of the gazebo. Property owners through their consultant and appraiser had this gazebo here assessed at $180,000. And I'm sure it's $180,000 location, but the structure itself is not worth $180,000. And that's the key part of doing greatest practical extent review and the 50% analysis is, well, not to get all economic nerdy here, but basically you have to do a regression analysis on this stuff and take all the other factors out of play. What is this structure worth in the town of Litchfield? If you put this gazebo anywhere in the town of Litchfield, how much is it worth? Not when it's real close to the water, not when it's far away from the water, just anywhere in the town, just the structure itself. And clearly, there isn't enough wood, shingles, and screen on that thing to add up to $180,000, even with the crazy lumber prices that came upon us as part of the pandemic. So that one didn't go very far. We have added the certified contractor language to the Chapter 1000 guidelines, and we're really hoping that more communities take part in this. And essentially what it requires is a certified contractor, someone that goes through John McLean's certification class here at the DEP, be on site to oversee the controls when an excavation contractor is moving dirt. That isn't to say that they need to be there all day, every day. They don't. They just need to come, make sure the erosion controls didn't get backed over, make sure they're still functioning properly, and getting things lined out to make sure that sediment isn't leaving the job sites. So an excavation contractor, it's had to get defined, obviously, but it excludes a bunch of things. Municipal, state, and federal employees conducting work, timber harvesters, farmers doing ag, homeowners doing their own work. As we were kind of just talking about with the gazebo, the reconstruction standards, if you remove less than 50% of the market value of the structure, everything can just go right back where it is. Relocation is only required when more than 50% of the market value is removed, damaged, or destroyed, which is, calculations that can be made. Usually, people bring in an appraiser to help with that, or a consultant. There is some language in there too now. Well, maybe it's in the next couple of slides, so I won't say it quite yet, but when they are looking at the relocation review, the reviewing authority determines where the existing structure could be relocated to meet the setback to the greatest practical extent. So what that's saying is the original structure, so the footprint of the original structure. A lot of times when people want to do a tear down rebuild, they're going to do an expansion at the same time. So it's almost like towns have to look at this as two separate applications. You have the movement of the original structure to the greatest practical extent, and then you do the expansion, which is a tough thing to get people to understand. But anyway, the criteria for making this determination, characteristics of the land, the lot, maybe there's some existing structures, existing septics, future septics, where the well is, condition of the existing foundation, steep slopes, big trees, things like that all come into play. And the department can provide advisory opinions, go out and do site walks with people to help figure that out. So like I was talking about, the relocation first, the expansion second. So over on the left, you get the original location of the structure. That needed to get moved back to the greatest practical extent. Is on the left-hand side there, they relocated and then they put the huge expansion out back. That's not what we're looking for. Over on the right, that's what we're looking for. Get the relocated structure back outside the setback and then do your expansion based on that. Lateral expansions are fine. And then, of course, wherever the original structure was located, that all needs to be revegetated with all levels, ground cover, shrub, and tree level. The biggest change that went into Chapter 1000 is the footprint and height. We changed over from floor area and volume to footprint and height on a tiered basis. Essentially, that was done, to be perfectly honest. Volume of a structure is very, very, very difficult to measure. And, for a geometry professor, the inside of a building's volume may not be that big or big of a deal to deal with. But for code officers and planning boards, select boards, appeals boards, not that easy. So the whole thing was simplified. Everybody can measure the outside of the building, which is the footprint, and to the peak of the roof, which is the height. Made it a lot more user-friendly, a lot more simple, and allowed for greater kind of customer service between applicants and communities and the DEP, because everybody could get on the same page. Now, the issue that we've ran into with this is, there's a whole bunch of communities that haven't updated to this yet. And so that kind of puts them in this weird legal spot. And we've had the Attorney Generals go over this extensively, and the call that was made is, if a town is a floor area and volume still, given how the statute reads, and to paraphrase, it says something in the order of, notwithstanding the local ordinance to the following shall apply. So basically saying it doesn't matter what's in your local ordinance. The state law is the state law. That's what you're dealing with. So in those towns, they actually have to review it under floor area and volume, and then they have to review it under footprint and height. And whichever one is more restrictive is the one they have to go with, which is challenging at best. And I venture to guess that is not happening. I can only imagine that towns are not all that interested in double reviewing projects, which is why we're really pushing hard to get people to adopt the most recent language. Because to be honest with you, the old 30% rule, as well as the old alternative rule, have completely been removed from statute. And the thought process was that this would be a mandatory deal. So as dealing with this, you get the footprint and height. So with the footprint, there's a cap limit per zone, and then or 30%. So it gives a little leeway. So municipalities can choose either just have the cap or by the 30%, or they can have both in there, and whichever is better for the homeowner, they'll deal with. Very limited expansions inside 25 feet of the resource, limited expansions in a resource protection district. So footprint. The entire area covered by the structure on a lot, including not limited to cantilevered, similar overhang extensions, as well as unenclosed structures such as patios and decks. So basically drip edge to drip edge is what footprint is. And if you got a deck, that all counts as well, or patios or any other stuff. Definitions using footprint: expansion of the structure, expansion of use, floor area, and non-conforming structure. So we had to make a few changes within those definitions. So here's kind of a quick, I'm more of a visual person rather than, reading everything in the regs. So this is very helpful. This is something we hand out to towns and planning boards quite often. So when you're inside 25 feet of a resource, there's no expansion of that structure at all unless the entire structure is located within the 25-foot setback. So if you're hanging over the 25-foot line, you can't expand inside 25 feet at all. If your whole structure is inside 25 feet, you can expand up to 800 square feet or 30%, and the max height is 15 feet or the height of the existing structure. No accessory structures, expansions inside 25 feet. Outside of 25, but within 75, you can get up to 1,000 square feet or 30%, whichever is greater. And that's maximum combined total footprint. So if you've got other structures on the property, it all counts together. No accessory structure expansion if closer to the shoreline than the principal structure. And the max height is 20 feet or the height of the existing structure. Outside of 75, inside 100, maximum expansion is up to 1,500 square feet or 30%. Whichever is greater, again, maximum combined total footprint. Can't expand accessory structures that are closer to the resource than the principal. And the max height back there is 25 feet or the height of the existing structure. So when you're dealing with trib streams or wetlands or rivers, that setback only goes out to 75 feet. So it's essentially the same rules that we just went over, but they only extend out to 75 feet. So outside of 75 feet, you can get to the max height of 35 feet, which is allowed within the shoreline zone, and you don't have to worry about the expansion principles. In resource protection, essentially it's the same thresholds inside 75 feet. If you happen to have a structure in RP that's that close to the water, anything outside of 75 feet and extending all the way to 250 holds the same principle that would normally only go to 100 in a limited residential area, with the expansion up to 1,500 square feet or 30%, whichever is greater. Again, no accessory structure expansion if closer to the water than the principal, and the max height at 25 feet or the existing structure. So this is kind of something, I don't need any real answers here, but this is something we do with in our CEO trainings. You got this situation, what can be expanded. So you can't expand the front half or the front 2/3 of the building because it's a straddler, it's inside 25 feet. So the only thing that you can expand is off the rear of the camp or the shed, given that the shed is no closer to the water than the principal. In this situation here, what could be expanded? So the only thing they're going to get on this thing is the camp or the shed. The garage is an accessory structure located inside 25 feet, so we couldn't expand that. But the camp and the shed are eligible. Another situation here. So the only thing that you can expand on this one is the camp, and that's just because you got two accessory structures that are closer to the resource than the principal, as well as having an accessory structure inside 25 feet. See, there used to be an optional allowance. You got an additional 500 square feet for certain activities. That all went away as well. That doesn't exist within the guidelines or the statute. So vegetation, it's the key to shoreline zoning, to be honest with you. One of the other DEP guys, Jeremy Deeds, in the water group, had conducted a study and came up with a lot of great information that really supported the shoreline zoning program, showing that if people had good buffers on lakes that have good shoreline zoning buffers, the lakes and ponds and resources are acting exactly as they should environmentally, with very little detrimental effects. On lakes where you don't have proper buffers, the same can't be said. So vegetation, I mean, it's the purposes. It's a cheap and natural way to intercept and infiltrate stormwater runoff. It slows erosion and sedimentation. Obviously, it provides habitat for birds and other wildlife, shade for aquatic habitat. And, one of the things that I've actually seen a little bit of a trend moving the other way, that privacy and conserve the natural character of Maine. It's funny, over the last few years, we've had more people wanting to plant trees down along their shoreline than cut them down, because they just don't want everybody, looking up their property and seeing them out having a barbecue or family reunion or whatever. So that's a positive thing. So when we're dealing with vegetation, we did add some new definitions to deal with trees, essentially. We've got a new definition of a sapling, a tree species that's less than 2 inches in diameter, a seedling, a tree species that's less than 4.5 feet in height, and obviously a tree, woody vegetation greater than 2 inches in diameter at 4.5 feet above ground level and at least 10 feet of maturity. Hazard trees is a new section that went into Chapter 1000. It's always been a policy since Rich Baker was in the chair, and but now it's actually in there, so towns have that to hold on to. If you've got some hazard trees and they're within the shoreline zoning buffer, if they create a cleared opening that's greater than 250 square feet, you'd need to do some replanting, no stump removal. Outside of the buffer, you can replace the tree volume you can replace the trees if the volume of trees removed have been exceeded. And all the trees that get put back all has to be native species. We don't want to see a bunch of invasives, non-native stuff getting out there, ornamentals and that kind of stuff when you're dealing with the buffer. Hazard tree, it's actually defined now. It has a structural defect under normal environmental conditions, not hurricanes and microbursts and all that stuff, but it has a high probability of failure and will strike a target. So a target can be anything, from the dock, deck, boat area, your house, parking area, campsites, things like that where people hang out, or pose a risk to bank stability. So if it's going to start ripping your bank down, if that tree falls, then you'd like to see that thing dealt with prior to that all happening. Dead trees, it seems kind of self-explanatory, but given the amount of brown-tail moth stuff that we have been dealing with over the past 10 years, a tree may look like the one in the picture. I know the oak tree that is right behind the window that is in front of me here looked just like this 3 years ago, and now it looks like a normal oak tree. But we had a bad brown-tail thing, and it ate all the leaves off it, and I was really thankful it came back because I didn't really want to cut down that tree. But dead trees, no foliage during the growing season, it can be removed. You can't create new lawn areas or the permanent cleared areas, and you can't remove stumps. Stumps hold the land together underground, so we like to see those stay in place. So storm damaged trees. So you get into, we've had a lot of the, microburst situations and stuff like that. Obviously, if things are storm damaged and create a cleared opening, then things need to be replanted. If there's good natural regeneration happening, they don't necessarily need to do any replanting. The big key here is you can't use these storm damage blowdown areas to create a new lawn area, and all the stumps need to stay in place. The stumps can be ground down to ground level. You just can't dig them up. A storm damaged tree is damaged beyond the point of recovery. Could be uprooted, blown down, still standing. To be honest with you, when I'm dealing with storm damaged trees, when I'm dealing with hazard trees, when I'm dealing with these whole calls, I advise towns to contact an arborist and have them come out and help make the call. And I also advise them that, the arborist be independent of the person that's going to be cutting down the tree, because if it's the same person, there's an economic incentive to say, yeah, I think that one's, damaged. We should cut that down because, $2,500 per tree to cut a tree down for a lot of these guys. And it's only a couple $100 to have them come out and make an assessment. So having that covered is a good thing. So some exemptions from the clearing standards that were added. Existing cleared areas, obviously maintenance cutting can be required. That those are all well and good. Permitted activities where the shoreline setbacks are not applicable, and agriculture when BMPs are used and standards are met. There's also the brownfields and the VRAP situation. So, if you've got a bunch of vegetation growing on a brownfield site or a VRAP site, that stuff can be taken down so the good work can be done to clean up that site. After the site cleanup is done, then we can worry about, getting it stabilized with vegetation. Another hot topic we deal with quite a bit is the non-native invasive vegetation. Towns can put this in there. They can, allow for vegetation removal above the standards, as long as, certain provisions of the ordinance are met. A lot of it's dealing with 25 feet away from the water and, doing that with hand tools rather than bringing in equipment. A lot of the stuff that we deal with is like Japanese knotweed. We get some stuff with like poison ivy and that kind of stuff too, but most of the time it's Japanese knotweed, and that stuff is so difficult to deal with. I've been struggling with it on my own property for a decade, but so non-native, obviously, I'm sure everyone on the call here knows this as well as I do, but it's not native to Maine. There's a good list that we steal or use from the Natural Areas program. I actually click onto that quite often to see when I'm getting replanting plans to see if anything is on that list or not. Obviously, emergency response, that's exempt from clearing. This kind of came into light when I think it was an oil truck rolled over down in southern Maine, and there was a lot of cleanup needed to be done. And there was, some folks out there saying, "Oh, well, they're removing all the vegetation." Well, we need to get the petroleum product out, and we worry about the vegetation after that. This site right here is actually one that I dealt with. It's one of the craziest cutting violations or veg removal violations that I had ever seen. They did it by all means necessary. They cut trees down. This was on the ocean. They cut them and let them fall into the ocean. And I think the reason we got all the calls about this one is all the trees ended up floating out into the lobstermen's lobster pots and cost them thousands of dollars. And they didn't really love that much. So it wasn't very hard to track down where the trees came from. Beyond the cutting, they drilled 1-inch holes and packed them with rock salt. And other ones, they drilled 1-inch holes and pumped them full of Roundup. And in others, they pounded in like copper spikes, hoping that that was going to kill the trees. The town in this case did a pretty awesome consent agreement that put levels of restitution on it, because it was clear that they had done the cutting because they were selling the house. They wanted to open up $1 million view, and they put right in the consent agreement that if the property was sold within 5 years, then they owed an additional $75,000 or something like that. In 10 years it was 50, and 15 years it was 25, to really discourage that kind of activity. When we're dealing with revegetation, trees and saplings must be replaced with, obviously, native saplings at a minimum. If you're planting more than 3, you can have 3 different types of species. No one species can make up more than 50% of the replanting. If this is done in regards to shoreline stabilization, that you need to reestablish the screening along the shoreline, and it has to have 80% survival rate for 5 years. So in most of these cases, CEOs need to go out and check the property once a year for 5 years to make sure that they got proper regrowth. Ground cover in terms of revegetation can be done with herbaceous vegetation. Quantities and varieties significant enough or sufficient enough to prevent erosion and provide good filtration. Where necessary, they can supplement with mulch. When I say mulch here, I'm not talking bark mulch. This is erosion control mulch. That way it doesn't float away on it. And, same survival rate for that. So, let's see. Huh, wait a minute. Did it skip a slide? Hold on a second. You scroll. Dead trees, storm trees. Huh. Well, I guess that slide didn't take, but so I'm sure a lot of you have seen and heard the discussions about accessory dwelling units around the state. There was some legislative, I think it was LD 2003, that established some regulations for accessory dwelling units. I got a copy of that early in the process, which was great because we were able to go through it very closely and realized very quickly that those standards were being applied to the entire state. And it basically was going to turn back the clock, 30, 40 years on shoreline zoning rules. So we were able to get in there and work with the bill sponsor to make sure that the dimensional requirements for activities for adding an accessory dwelling unit inside the shoreland zone were required. So as the language went forward, it basically said along the lines of, if an accessory dwelling unit is being built within the shoreland zone, the dimensional requirements established under the local ordinance and department rules shall be adhered to. So if you, with this, when I give this talk to CEOs, I was like, don't think of it as an accessory dwelling unit. Don't even really use accessory dwelling unit when you're talking about the shoreline zone. It's just another dwelling unit. A dwelling unit is a defined thing: bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. And if someone is looking to build one of those within the shoreline zone, then they need to meet the dimensional requirements for both. So that would include them having an additional, if it's on a lake, let's say, 200 feet of frontage, 40,000 square feet of lot area, and they would need to maintain a width on their property of 400 feet at 100 feet back. So typically when we see these now, if someone owns land outside of the 250, so outside of the shoreline zone, that's typically where we see the ADUs going, which is perfectly fine because it's outside of the shoreline zone. It doesn't need to meet those dimensional requirements any longer. Obviously, it would need to still meet subsurface wastewater code and all of that. But an accessory dwelling unit is just another dwelling in terms of shoreline zoning rules, which is something we've written about in a bunch of newsletter articles and all of that. So here's me and the staff, obviously, we don't do the glamour shot thing or in-office shot thing. All our pictures here are us actually getting out and enjoying the resources that we've essentially dedicated our careers to protecting. Ross Gatcomb, he's our newest guy. He's been with us over a year now. And he is located in the Northern Maine office. Jessica Sayers is our representative in the Eastern Maine Regional Office, which is in Bangor. Jeff Kalinich handles our Portland office in the Southern Maine Regional Office. And me, very young me, holding an awesome brook trout at one of my favorite streams, handles the Central Maine area. I will say I can send this presentation to Tom, and he can, put it out so everybody can, see it or access it. Just to add on to this, I know me personally, I assume my staff gets a similar number. I get probably 75 phone calls a day, and probably 40 of those, because you're on the phone with somebody or doing a presentation or doing something like that, ends up on a voicemail. And actually, if you call my phone right now, you'll get a voicemail that says, "Please don't leave me a voicemail." Here's my email address, because I can just respond so much quicker. Even if somebody sent me an email saying, "Hey, can you just give me a quick call?" I can respond a lot quicker that way than somebody being buried 40 deep on my voicemail. And if I don't listen to them all on the same day, they're going to be 80 deep by the end of the next day. And then my voicemail box is probably going to be full anyway, and people get really upset. So try to do the best we can with that. But 4 people around the state, we take a lot of calls. So, anyway,
there is one question here from Hannah. When was the change made from floor area and volume to footprint and height? And I can't remember the year, but it seems like a while ago now.
You're right. So the change officially happened in state statute in 2013, and then based on those statutory changes in 2015, it made it into the Chapter 1000 guidelines for the 2015 amendment.
Okay. And others on the call, there must be a bunch of questions. And I did realize some of you guys are newer on the call. Some of you were here about a year and a half ago. Colin gave a similar presentation. But I kind of ran through the list, and I think most of you, there are still a lot of new folks on these calls. So I know we have picked up a couple new faces here. So some of you must have some questions. So feel free to you can just shout them out or put them in chat. Don't call Colin, give him an email.
Well played.
Oh, I'm shocked of all subject matters that this one's not getting questions. Honestly, well, it's a subject that a lot of CEOs, for most, it's an experience issue. Once you've been doing it long enough, you've seen enough variations. That's why the diagrams are helpful to me, because those make sense to me. But there's always caveats that I thought some folks would have. Anything else? I don't know, Joan, if you have anything. I had one question. Really simple. I always have something. This is probably very simple for the CEOs out there. I am not a CEO. 2-acre timber harvest. Is that a 2-acre lot or the harvest 2 acres?
So you have to, to be considered an actual timber harvest, from what I've been told over at forestry, is you need to be cutting at least 2 acres. Now, in terms of the definition there, you would need to have those 2 acres be in the shoreland zone to be able to cut down there. And this situation came up. It was kind of weird, actually. I think it was Dixfield, or that area, where 3 or 4 property owners along the river all got together and had a forester come in and hung a timber harvesting notification on the tree, and they basically demolished all the buffer right down to the river. When we came out to investigate, I was like, oh, well, that's clearly over 2 acres, that they've cut. But what ended up coming to pass is none of those property owners owned more than 2 acres in the shoreland zone. They all owned like an acre and a quarter. And so in terms of the Maine Forest Service and the Chapter 1000 guidelines, it wasn't a timber harvest per se, because they didn't own that 2 acres. They had to own it individually. And I don't think that the Forest Service necessarily liked a combined forestry notification, being associated with 3 different property owners like that. But yeah, it's a good question.
Okay. I just want to. Jim Fisher has a question.
Oh, I always have questions. One that's sort of very specific and then a more general one. The specific question is I frequently have a problem with people who cut trees down, then either the tree falls across the property line and knocks a neighbor's tree over, or the blowdowns that occur after an area has been cut are attributed by the neighbor to someone cutting on their land. And not necessarily shoreland, but it happens there too. And in Deer Isle, there's a lot of shoreland, obviously. The more general one, which you might get to, is also how legislation, and Joan may have an answer, how legislation that recently passed will be implemented. LD 2003, there was a really rigorous process of getting us to update our zoning ordinances, but I don't know if the new rules are going to go through a similar process.
So you cut out there a little bit. I don't know if that was on my end, if everybody saw that.
Oh, sorry.
You had said, no, that's okay. I'm assuming it's probably on my end because my computer is now like blinking all over the place. But from what I heard was, someone doing some cutting on their property, they knock down a neighbor's tree, or the more similar situation where somebody's done some cutting and now trees are less wind firm and they start blowing down on the neighbor's property, and that's where you pause. That's where I locked up over here.
Well, that was the specific question. The general one was just how recent legislation will be implemented. LD 2003 was a big to-do, and all the towns were well aware of what we needed to do. I haven't heard much about any changes we need to make going forward.
Okay, sure. So the tree thing, if somebody's cutting down a tree and it knocks down a neighbor's tree, if it leads to a situation where now the neighbors have exceeded their allowance for vegetation removal by that tree being struck, then yeah, something should be replanted in its place. Same way if the blowdowns occur. I think it turns into a civil matter if somebody's cut down a tree and it knocks down somebody else's tree. I don't think it's necessarily a civil matter if somebody's cleared the neighbor's property and now all of a sudden your trees start blowing down. I wouldn't want to get in front of a judge on that one. But that would be my thoughts on that. In terms of more recent legislation, there have been some items that have gone into place over the past few years. Probably the biggest one, shoreline zoning wise, was the new calculation of height when a structure is located within the floodplain. That essentially is establishing a baseline to place their measurement, as well as an allowance for people to raise their buildings to get them out of the floodplain. For years and years and years, I mean, extending all the way, I remember talking to Rich Baker about this back in the day. And somebody buys a house, a camp or whatever in the floodplain, and a lot of times they would immediately start having issues with the amount that flood insurance was. And when Rich and I had always talked about that, it's like, that's not really a shoreline zoning thing. You bought the property knowing what the floodplain insurance was going to be, and now you're complaining that the flood insurance is too much, and that isn't really something that we took into account. I know there's a precedent in environmental law called moving to the source, but that's usually when you like move in next to a slaughterhouse or something like that, and you can't complain that it smells. This is a little bit different. Obviously, we've heard this for a couple of decades now. So a change was made. And the change essentially is that when you're measuring height of a structure in the floodplain, you measure from the bottom of the sill, so the lowest horizontal, and on this definition, I need to get it amended because I want it to be exactly what Sue Baker's group over at Floodplain has, not our version, because it's caused a few problems. But as it reads now, you're taking the measurement from the bottom of the sill to the peak of the roof, and that's the height of the structure. So if you bring it up on posts, it allows you to get up a little bit higher. And essentially what they're allowing now is people to get up 3 feet above base flood elevation. And hopefully that helps with the insurance principle. The biggest issue that we've run into with that is in some of these densely developed areas around the state, especially in coastal environments. If the person out front raises their building 3 feet, then maybe the person that lives behind them no longer can see the water. But again, that's something that was brought up during this process, and it didn't get a ton of consideration, in my opinion. So it is what it is on that at this point. I can say that when statutory changes are made, I immediately get into our Mad Libs of local ordinance drafts and update those drafts that we send to municipalities to include the most recent statutory changes, even though we haven't updated 2015 to reflect some of this. I get the distinct feeling that next summer, Chapter 1000 will work its way into updating status. And given that it's major substantive rulemaking, it has to go through a lot of hoops to get it done. So I guess you can keep your eyes and ears peeled on that. I'm sure there'll be a lot of folks that are in this that may want to come to the public comment period or provide comment to the program so we can get updates done that are effective for all. There's been a bunch of stuff through the years since the 2015 update that I've noted within Chapter 1000 that are just like cleanup stuff, references that don't go to the right place, that kind of stuff. It's very challenging in rulemaking, as many of you know, that in-house staff are dealing with a lot of the rules, and then that stuff gets shipped off to the reviewers, the attorneys, and others. And when it comes back, things look a little different than when you sent it out. And they may not deal with it every single day, so they may not catch the nuances of certain things. But it's a work in progress. I do think that the 2015 changes that went in with footprint and height was absolutely phenomenal. That helped so many CEOs in dealing with reviews and planning boards as well, making it a whole lot more user friendly.
Thank you, Joan. Joan has posted quite a lengthy list of links for discussions about the housing programs, which is kind of where we see some pressure, trying to allow more auxiliary dwelling units and other kinds of structures where we're not sure there's room or it's wise, but looks like rulemaking is going to go through a series of public meetings.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess the biggest thing for towns and CEOs and appeals boards, select boards, planning boards is just to remember that within the shoreland zone, the dimensional requirements apply. So if you require 40,000 square feet of lot area and 200 feet of frontage per dwelling, then that's what it is, regardless of what it's called. Whether it's an accessory, whether it's a regular dwelling. a lot of folks these days I've seen trying to throw the whole bunkhouse thing around, and like, oh no, it's not a dwelling, it's just a bunkhouse. Well, a bunkhouse is a defined thing, not shoreline zoning, but under subsurface wastewater rules, a bunkhouse can't have any plumbing going to it. It can't be hooked up to the subsurface wastewater. So that isn't going to meet the definition of a dwelling, but it is a structure, so it definitely needs to meet the setback. But there's been a bunch of challenges to that part of the law for sure.
All right. Looking like there's no more questions.
I
Thank you,
just
Jim,
wanna-
for that one.
I actually
Oh.
do. I do have one more question
Go ahead,
here,
John.
if we have time.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't want to veer too far off course here, but I'm wondering if you can just talk about the 2-acre limit to timber harvesting. Is that just related to like kind of shoreland areas, or yeah, what is that? Can you talk briefly about that?
So all I know is the shoreline zoning aspect. If the cut is happening outside of the shoreline zone, I don't know what the rules are. I would definitely encourage you to reach out to like Tom Gilbert over at the Maine Forest Service. He's the contact that I use pretty much over there for stuff. And if he isn't the right person to answer the question, then he can get you to the right spot. I assume it's statewide. It's got to be 2 acres, just because I'm pretty sure we got the definition from them.
I am not the expert on this, but I think when you have a harvest of less than 2 acres, it can happen without a Maine Forest Service permit. So if you want to just cut 2 acres, that's not in the shoreland, less than 2 acres, that is, not in the shoreland, you can do it. It depends town by town. Some towns may require, their ordinance may have different requirements, but statewide, when you go over 2 acres, you've always had to notify the Maine Forest Service in the past, which I think is now now it's even bypassing a lot of towns. You used to have to go to your CEO, make your request for timber harvest, and the CEO would pass that along to the Forest Service. But I
Gotcha.
think now a lot of towns are actually bypassing it. You're getting that permit right through the state. If I'm saying that
Gotcha.
right, I'm not sure, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess where my mind went was like if you wanted to clear, a half an acre to build a house, like could you sort of like incorporate some amount of timber harvest into that, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so in that case, if the house is located within the shoreland zone, it wouldn't be big enough to be considered a timber harvest, because there would have to be 2 acres within the shoreland zone. That would just be clearing for development, which is completely
Gotcha.
allowed. That's, there's provisions in there for people to build new houses, new dwellings and stuff like that. It's just requiring people to get back to the setback and maintain the points. That's another thing that I didn't really touch on is, the vegetation removal standards. In a regular buffer, there are allowances for people to, cut a few trees, limb branches, and all of that. There's just in most cases, it's a 25 by 50 grid. You need to maintain a certain number of points within each grid. The grids can't be overlapping. All the trees can't be big trees at the end. You got to have, all sizes of trees through it, so you don't create this monoculture where everything's going to fall down at the same time. The pruning of the bottom third of trees to allow folks that have a camp that, or a house that isn't in resource protection, so they can kind of see down to the water, but through the trees, that's completely allowed. So there's a bunch of different ways for people to do some vegetation removal in compliance with the standards. And again, back to what Jeremy's project revealed, if people clear to the buffer standards, even if you get right down to the lowest amount of points allowed within the grid and you prune branches and do all of that stuff, you're still going to have a resource that is working effectively for the organisms that are living in it or using it from the upland. One other thing that I'll add here before we pop off, we've always had a 6-foot wide meandering path allowance down to a resource. We've had a lot of people call in wanting to, put, pavement or cement or gravel or whatever. And our response has always pretty much been no. you're allowed a 6 foot wide path. The way the rules are written, that 6 foot wide path is established in the vegetation removal section of Chapter 1000. And so it doesn't speak to any structural component. So long before me, Rich Baker and the previous coordinators had put it out there that if somebody is putting erosion control mulch on their 6 foot wide meandering path, that was completely legitimate. But any other structural component, gravel, pea gravel, flagstone, cement, any of that stuff wasn't allowed. Well, over the past 5 to 7 years, I've taken a lot of calls from, disabled veterans, people recovering from cancer treatments. One thing or another is limiting someone's availability to access the water. And that's definitely not the intent of shoreland zoning, is to limit access to anyone. And so what we kind of did over the past 12 months is tried to figure out a way that we could make some allowances for folks so they have better access. And what we kind of came up with is combining the 6 foot wide meandering path with the stairway provision that allows someone to put a 4 foot wide access way to the resource, set of stairs, ramp, something like that, so people can get over uneven terrain. And what we did with that is essentially said, if there's a structural component beyond, just erosion control mulch, then you can use gravel, you could use a wooden boardwalk, you could put in flagstones. You still can't pave to the water, you still can't cement down to the water, all of that stuff. But if you need to make it a little bit more passable, and in most cases it gets to wheelchair accessibility, a 4 foot wide boardwalk type wooden structure is something that is consistent with the guidelines in terms of an access structure found in that part of the guidelines. And kind of extrapolating on that, if you wanted to gravel stuff down or put in flagstone or something like that, it's a viable option. That hasn't made it into Chapter 1000 yet. It's a policy that we're working on. It seems to be working pretty well. It seems to be pretty agreeable to property owners as well as consultants and municipalities. But something I wasn't on the slides, but was just trying to think of anything else that has come up over the last 12 months that I could throw out there for people to learn from. So,
can I throw one more thing out there?
Absolutely.
Retaining walls. I'm always surprised to see retaining walls popping up every now and then in the name of erosion control.
Yeah. So, retaining walls is a struggle for sure. As is written in the rule, you're allowed to have a low retaining wall, not for the purposes of controlling erosion, but that retaining wall is limited to 2 feet in height. So if somebody's trying to level out an area or something like that, they're dealing with steep slopes going down in there, 2 foot height aggregate is what you're limited to. I think people are kind of taking advantage of the retaining wall function within the standards that is saying that retaining walls are allowed if it's for the purposes of erosion control. I don't know that all the municipalities are going over those applications with a fine-tooth comb in terms of whether it's necessary for the purposes of controlling erosion. There's other options other than retaining walls, but I agree. You see a lot more popping up. I just saw one a week ago when I was out fishing with a buddy of mine, and that one was really disturbing because there isn't even anything on the property. There's nothing there. There's a driveway, a giant retaining wall, and the land is stripped right to the water. So that one's getting followed up on. But the other thing I would add is the Natural Resources Protection Act component. For retaining walls, all of these things are going to be happening inside 75 feet to the resource. So they needed to come in to get a permit by rule to do that, or an individual NERPA permit to do that. So when these are coming in, we are getting those permit applications shipped over to the shoreline zoning staff so we can make comment on it and really kind of hone in on whether a retaining wall is the right call. But if somebody is not sending the permit in, then we never know about it, and then potentially it leads to some violation follow-up that, you know, is difficult to deal with at best.
Joan?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on a comment that I put in the chat. Colin, you mentioned in one of your slides you didn't know the significance of March 24th, 1990 date.
Yeah.
And I put a link in the chat to a board order for a municipality that hadn't updated its ordinance, but they were, and I remember this because I'm part of the old guard in the Rich Baker days. I remember there were some significant changes to shoreline zoning guidelines in March 1990 that forced ordinances to make significant updates in 92. So I just want to say the link that I put in there was not to call out the town of Whitefield. That's a board order. It's a link to a board order from back then. But it gives some history for what March 24th, 1990 meant.
Right.
And I'm sure if I dig deeper, I or anyone else could find what those specific changes were that went into effect. But just wanted to call that to your attention and to apologize if anybody's offended at the fact that I threw Whitefield out there for recognition that they didn't adopt their ordinances and the state had taken action to regulate their shoreline zone.
Well, I don't think anybody can really take offense to it because they still haven't updated and they are still state imposed. So they're just riding that train right to the end. And I deal with them all of the time. They're a great community, but they would really benefit by updating and having their own ordinance because they're dealing with stuff that is ancient history in terms of shoreline zoning. And yeah, it is interesting because I do know that there were some substantial changes made around that date. I just didn't know how it tied to non-vegetated surfaces. That's the part that's squirrely to me, is like, how did the ledge date? But that must have been the date when, that very well could have been the date when non-vegetated surfaces and the 20% and the 70% were established. That would be my biggest guess on that. I was just thinking when because I'm like you, I am tied to the past. If you came into the DEP today and you were in the DEP 24 years ago, the only person that would still be there is me in land. And I have seen 70, what am I up to? 76 people come and go from the Land Bureau in Augusta from my time there, which is, oh my God, of a number, because there's only like 15 people that work there. So that's, I mean, you do the math, it's like 5 or 6 flushes of people that have come and gone. Right. And that includes admin, bureau directors, you know, all that stuff. So it's been a challenge for sure. But
well, so I remember as a result of those changes, going back to the topo maps for each municipality in the region I worked in and finding the confluence of 2 perennial streams because the definition of streams changed. So it was significant. So, yeah, I don't know what the history was related specifically to non-vegetated surfaces, but clearly there was something there.
Yeah, because I just pulled open the March 24th, 1990 version of Chapter 1000. Actually, kind of.
Can you link that?
Can scroll along with me here. I can send it out to you. They're not online anywhere. They're just in our H drive. They're actually probably not even in our H drive. I am a creature of habit, so I took all the paper and scanned it in and made sure that I had it because historical perspective, when you lose the number of staff that the department has lost in our unit through the years, is not lost on me. I mean, I'm sure he probably doesn't need me to call him, but I still call Rich and email him just to like, hey, how did you guys do this? Like, how did you get to here? And but yeah, so right in here, that 20%, 70% shows up in that version. just yeah, close current tab, whatever. All right, that's not what I want. All right, so in the 1988 version, it's definitely not going to be in there because this is from this is back in 1988. You could come in and just construct a beach.
Right.
And there is no lot criteria. All it says at this time period in here is structures shall not cover more than 20% of any lot. So it wasn't non-vegetated, it was just the structures at that point. So you're right on the money, Joan. That's the change that happened that went to that. Interesting. But yeah, if anybody wants, like I said, I got all the shoreline zoning things back to 1973, just because some of this stuff does come up. So if anybody does want that, I would be more than happy to grab 3 or 4 of them and then throw them in an email. I don't know how many of these I could stuff in one email before the system kicks us out. The state server doesn't really like big emails these days. So, but.
Well, thanks for that trip down memory lane.
Yeah.
All right.
I often wish that memory lane had Rich still sitting in the chair and me being a lot younger talking to Rich about work, because I definitely I actually had to go out and present in Belgrade to their planning board, and that's where Rich is from. And I remember asking the planning board chair, like, well, why do you want me to come out? You got the godfather of shoreline zoning sitting right next to you. Like, he's forgotten more than I know.
Right.
Like,
and for those that don't know, Rich Baker essentially wrote shoreland zoning. He was the first director of shoreland zoning program, and the fact that he's still around and able to provide guidance, I think, is wonderful.
Yeah, although unpaid, I do have, well, unpaid by the state. I definitely, if I see him stream side, I make sure I hook him up with lunch or whatever he's looking for. But he's doing well. He's loving life. He's enjoying retirement. And that's all I can ask. And I love the fact that him and George Seal and some of these other guys that, were longtime DEPers, you can still reach out to them and get some of that perspective. Because like I said, for a lot of us that are, even someone like me, I've been here 25 years, and he still knows like the beginning. And the historical perspective in all land use law is super helpful to know, how you got to where you're at, what worked, what didn't work. This is why we changed, those type of items. So being able to lean on him is something I cherish every single day. And I actually hope that I will be able to retire still being able to lean on him a little bit. Right up until the point he says, stop calling and emailing me.
Well, Colin, I think the way you feel about him is how a lot of us feel about you, because you're extremely helpful all the time in working at the regional level. It's just so appreciated that you're always willing to help. So seriously, thank you for everything you do.
I appreciate that. I mean, I learned from the best. Rich taught me what I needed to know. And, I've had a very good group of supervisors at state government, and given my background coming from the restaurant business and customer service oriented, I mean, hey, if we can't, the thing I tell my staff all the time is if we're not helping the people that help us, then we're not being very effective, because there's only 4 of us. So if there's a group of hundreds of people out there, whether they're municipal officials or consultants to the municipal officials or, planners or whatever, we need to make it a priority to help everybody we can, because they're helping us in the long run. And that applies to, the private citizens as well. If somebody calls in and they want to figure out before they go out and cut down a bunch of trees, what's legal to do, hell yeah, let's do that first. let's tell them the right thing, so CEOs and towns and us don't have to go out and clean up the mess. But I appreciate the kind words. Me and my staff try really, really hard, and I am blessed with the staff that I have, that everybody is of like mind and are super helpful. I will say, for the folks that may be on the call that are in the southern Maine area, Jeff has been able to retire for a couple of years now, and he hasn't really talked about it a lot. He mentioned something in passing a few months back that he's thinking about it. So I really hope he doesn't, because the hiring process is not the greatest, but he's been great, and his historical perspective, we'll miss that too if he does decide to retire. But hey, that's the goal, right? Make it to retirement and get up out of here and go enjoy the rest of your life. And he's put in extra years. I told him, like, man, I think you're silly. As soon as I hit my date, I'm out. No disrespect to anybody, but that's where I'm at. Like, this is a situation where I'm looking forward to spending more time knee deep in a stream and riding roller coasters and enjoying family. So, but I got a bunch more years before that's going to happen. So everybody will have to deal with me for a little bit longer.
Well, this has been great, Colin. Thank you very much. Every time I've seen your talks a few times, and I still learn stuff. It doesn't sink in sometimes. So thank you. Reminder that our next webinar is Friday, September 5th, and we still don't have a topic yet. So feel free. We'll kind of brainstorm on topics. And that's all we have for you. Everyone have a great day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for
Thanks,
having me.
Colin.
Yeah.
Take care.